I'll never forget the morning I opened that envelope. It looked innocent, enough plain white paper, the HOA's logo in the corner, my name typed neatly across the front. I thought it was a routine notice about landscaping, or maybe a reminder about the next community meeting. But as soon as I slid my finger along the seal and unfolded the letter, my entire world shifted. Immediate violation, cease and desist all commercial activity from your garage. That's what it said, cold, sharp, unapologetic. I read the words 3 times, trying to process them. My garage, my small workshop. The place where I had poured my sweat and time into building something that actually mattered. I wasn't running a nightclub or a noisy auto shop. I was just making products, packaging orders, and trying to get a business off the ground. But apparently, in the eyes of the HOA, my dream was nothing more than a violation. I stood there in my driveway holding that letter, my hands trembling. The morning sun was shining, kids were riding their bikes down the street. Neighbors were watering their lawns, and yet I felt like the ground had just been pulled out from under me. This wasn't just a notice, it was a threat. A warning that, if I didn't comply, they would come after me with fines, penalties, maybe even legal action. At first, disbelief hit me. Was this a mistake? Surely they couldn't be serious. My garage wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, it wasn't hurting anyone. But then, as I read the letter again, I realized there was no mistake. The HOA had decided that my dream didn't belong in their pristine little neighborhood. And, just like that, years of hard work felt like they were being ripped out of my hands. But underneath the shock, something else started to rise. Anger. Who were they to tell me what I could or couldn't do in my own home? Who were they to decide that my effort, my creativity, my chance to build something bigger than myself had no place here? I clenched the letter in my fist, feeling the paper crumple as a single thought carved itself into my mind. They thought they could crush me, but they had no idea what they were starting. Back then, I had no idea how far this fight would go. I didn't know the battles I'd face, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. I didn't know how high the stakes would rise or how close I'd come to losing everything. But I also didn't know that this letter, this attempt to destroy me, would become the spark that lit the fire of something unstoppable. Because this is the story of how the HOA tried to ban my business from my garage, and how, against all odds, that business grew so powerful it ended up owning the very HOA that once tried to kill it. Before I take you there, let me tell you how it all started. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just a guy with a dream, a little bit of ambition, and a garage that doubled as my workshop. To anyone passing by, my house looked like every other house on the block: 2 stories, neat lawn, tidy driveway. But behind that garage door, my world was different. It was cluttered with tools, shelves, packaging materials, and boxes of prototypes. I had been working on my business idea for years, ever since college. While most of my friends went off to work 9-to-5 jobs, I couldn't let go of the idea of building something of my own. I didn't want to spend my life answering to someone else. I wanted freedom. I wanted to create. And the garage was where it all began. It wasn't glamorous. In the summer, it was stifling hot, sweat dripping off my forehead as I worked late into the night. In the winter, I wore 2 sweaters and a pair of gloves, trying to keep my fingers warm enough to handle small tools. But I didn't care. Every order I shipped out, every product I perfected, every email from a satisfied customer made it worth it. And slowly, it started to work. Orders were picking up. I had a website that was beginning to see traffic. A few local stores had even reached out, interested in carrying my products. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was hope, but apparently, the HOA didn't see hope. All they saw was a garage that wasn't being used for cars. All they saw was commercial activity. that didn't fit their picture-perfect vision of suburban life. At first, I thought maybe they'd understand if I explained. Maybe they'd see I wasn't hurting anyone, that my business wasn't loud or disruptive. I imagined sitting down with them, showing them what I was building, and finding some kind of compromise. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't about noise or disruption. This was about control. The HOA thrived on control. And to them, my little garage business wasn't just a violation of rules, it was a challenge to their authority. I didn't realize it then. But that letter was only the first shot in a war that would change everything. Because the truth was, my business meant more to me than the HOA could possibly understand. It wasn't just about money. It was about freedom. It was about proving to myself that I could build something real, something lasting, from nothing but an idea and hard work. Losing that business would mean losing a part of myself. And I wasn't about to let anyone, especially a group of people with clipboards and petty rules, take that from me. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them shut me down. Not now. Not ever. And that's where the fight truly began. The day after that letter arrived, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the crumpled paper like it was some kind of enemy. The more I read it, the angrier I got. The language wasn't just strict heat. It was smug, like they already assumed I would bow down, roll over, and do whatever they said. I decided to reach out. Maybe, I thought, there had been some mistake. Maybe they just didn't understand what I was doing. So, I typed out an email to the HOA board. I kept it polite, professional. I explained that I wasn't running a noisy auto shop or some kind of dangerous warehouse. I was packaging products, working quietly, and building something meaningful. I assured them it didn't affect the neighborhood in any negative way. I hit send and waited. 3 days passed before I got a reply. It was short, so short in fact that it almost made me laugh. Your property is not in compliance. Cease and desist all commercial activity immediately. Failure to comply will result in fines. That was it. No acknowledgement of what I'd written. No attempt at dialogue. Just a wall of authority. A blunt refusal to even consider the possibility that what I was doing was harmless. That was the first time I realized this was bigger than just me and my garage. This was about power. The HOA thrived on power. And right now, I was standing in the one place they didn't want anyone standing. Between their rules and their control, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. Maybe, I thought, face-to-face, they'd be more reasonable. Maybe if they saw me as a person, not just a name on a letter, they'd actually listen. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Rows of plastic chairs lined up, facing a long folding table where the board sat like judges. I walked in with a letter in my hand and a knot in my stomach. Neighbors filled the room, chatting in low voices until the president, Mr. Jacobs, a stiff, silver-haired man who always wore a suit even on weekends, called the meeting to order. The agenda rolled on with discussions about landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, and parking violations. Then, finally, my name was called. I stood, letter in hand, and explained. I told them about my business, about how quiet it was, about how it didn't hurt anyone. I told them this was more than just work. It was my dream, my future. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. A few neighbors nodded. One woman in the back even clapped softly before being hushed by the president. But then came the objections. A man in the front row stood up and said, "We moved here for peace and order. Businesses belong in business districts, not garages." Another chimed in, "What if everyone starts running businesses from their homes? It'll ruin the neighborhood." And then Jacobs, the president, leaned forward and said, "The rules exist for a reason. If we allow one exception, we open the door for chaos." We cannot allow commercial activity in this community. Just like that, my words meant nothing. My passion, my hard work, the quiet truth that I wasn't bothering anyone, didn't matter. The decision had already been made. I left that meeting with my jaw tight and my fists clenched. Some neighbors avoided my eyes as I walked past. Others gave me a sympathetic smile, but none of it helped. I had lost this round, and I knew it. Next week, the fines started. Small, at first $50, then $100. Notices appeared in my mailbox, like clockwork. Each one colder than the last. But here's the thing. Instead of scaring me into compliance, every letter, every fine, every petty threat only fueled me. Each one was like pouring gasoline onto the fire inside me. Still, I couldn't ignore the toll it was taking. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was crazy for fighting this hard. Friends told me to just move, to find a place where the HOA couldn't touch me. My family worried I was digging myself into a hole. And yet, every time I considered quitting, I pictured that garage door. I pictured the shelves stacked with my products, the orders waiting to be shipped, the dream I had worked too hard to abandon. The HOA thought they were squeezing me into a corner. But what they didn't realize was that pressure creates diamonds. And I was about to find my way out. The escalation came faster than I ever imagined. At first, it was just the fine small amounts stacking up like bricks on my chest. But then, the letters grew sharper, colder, more threatening. They started mentioning legal action. They claimed they'd place a lien on my home if I didn't stop illegal commercial activity. That word legal hit me like a punch to the gut. What I was doing wasn't against the law. I knew that. But the way the HOA phrased it, you'd think I was running a black market operation out of my garage instead of packaging boxes and teas and answering emails. And then the whispers started. Walking my dog in the evenings, I noticed neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I passed. At the community pool, I overheard two women muttering about that guy running a business out of his house, their voices dripping with disdain. The worst part was when a neighbor I considered a friend pulled me aside and said, "Look, man, I get it. You're just trying to make a living. But the HOA isn't going to back off. You're making life harder for all of us. Just stop before it gets worse." That cut deeper than I expected, because it confirmed something I had started to suspect. The HOA wasn't just fighting me directly. They were turning the community against me. And it was working. The pressure built day by day. I'd open the mailbox with a knot in my stomach, wondering what new punishment was waiting. My phone buzzed, with emails full of threats disguised as official communication. At night, I sat in my garage, surrounded by boxers and shipping labels, staring at the work I loved, but beginning to wonder if it was worth the battle. There was one night in particular I'll never forget. I had just finished a long day, and the silence in the garage was heavy. I sat on a stool, elbows on my knees, and let the weight of it all sink in. What if they're right? I whispered to myself. What if I'm just being stubborn? What if I should give up? I thought about the money piling up in fines, the sideways glances from neighbors, the constant anxiety that hung over me like a storm cloud. I thought about my family, about whether I was dragging them into a fight they hadn't asked for. That was my lowest point. Sitting in the dim light of my garage, surrounded by the very dream that was causing all this pain, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. But just as that doubt threatened to swallow me, a spark lit inside. It started with a single thought. What if the HOA doesn't actually have as much power as they think they do? That question echoed in my mind like thunder. I realized I had been reacting to their threats without questioning them. I had accepted their words as law. But what if they weren't? What if there were cracks in their armor? That night, I opened my laptop, and started researching. I read state laws. I combed through city ordinances. I dug into property rights, zoning codes, and the actual authority of HOAs. The more I read, the more something became clear. They weren't nearly as powerful as they pretended to be. In fact, I found loopholes, big ones. Rules about commercial activity that didn't apply the way they claimed. Limitations on the fines they could legally impose. Restrictions on what HOAs could actually enforce when it came to home-based businesses. By the time the sun came up, I was exhausted but electrified. The fear that had been weighing me down was replaced by something else. Determination. The HOA thought they had me cornered, but I had just discovered a door they didn't want me to see, and I was ready to kick it wide open. The next letter I received from the HOA was the same recycled garbage, cease and desist. Violation of community bylaws. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation. This time, though, instead of my chest tightening with fear, I smiled. I had spent weeks digging into the fine print of state law, local zoning regulations, and even the HOA's own charter. I knew the rules better than they did. And I knew something they didn't want me to know. Most of their threats had no legal teeth, so I wrote back, not a long rant, not an emotional plea. A simple, professional letter citing the exact section of state law that protected home-based businesses like mine. I highlighted the clause that said HOAs could not ban or restrict a business that didn't generate excessive traffic, noise, or visible disturbances. Then, just to twist the knife, I attached a copy of their own governing documents, which mentioned absolutely nothing about garage-based businesses. When I dropped that letter into the mailbox, I felt a surge of power I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself, I was going on offense. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. They summoned me, probably expecting me to walk in with my head bowed, ready to apologize. Instead, I walked in with a binder, full of documents. Highlighted pages sticking out like swords ready to be drawn. The president cleared her throat and began with her usual condescending tone. You're operating an illegal business in violation of our bylaws, I cut her. Off-com, controlled. No, I'm not, and here's why. I opened the binder and laid out the facts. The state laws, the local codes. Their own rules, or rather, their lack of them. For the first time, I watched their smug confidence falter. They exchanged nervous glances. The treasurer whispered something to the secretary. The president's voice cracked slightly when she tried to respond. In that moment, I realized something. Bullies crumble when you stand your ground. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not with knowledge and proof. But I wasn't finished. Over the next few weeks, I began to transform. My garage business, not just legally protecting it, but expanding it. I upgraded the workspace, made it more professional. I set up clear hours to minimize traffic, just to keep things tidy. I even put up soundproofing in the garage to make sure no one could complain about noise. I wasn't just running a business anymore, I was building something undeniable. And words started to spread. Neighbors who once gave me dirty looks started coming by, curious. They asked what I did. I explained. Some became customers. Others admired the fact that I stood up to the HOA when everyone else was too scared. Slowly, the whispers turned. Instead of being that guy causing trouble, I became the guy who beat the HOA at their own game. Of course, the board didn't give up easily. They tried to find me again. They threatened another lien. But each time, I countered with the law. Each time, I sent them running back to their boardroom, scrambling for answers. And here's where the twist came. While digging deeper into the HOA's financial records, which were public for members, I discovered something shocking. The HOA was in debt. Their funds were mismanaged. Dues were high, but money was disappearing into pointless projects and inflated contracts. I realized something powerful. They were weak, and weakness meant opportunity. That's when the idea hit. Me? What if I didn't just defend myself against the HOA? What if I took control of it? When I first stumbled onto the HOA's financial reports, I wasn't sure if what I was seeing was incompetence or corruption. Either way, it was a mess. Thousands of dollars funneled into beautification projects that never seemed to materialize. Landscaping contracts paid out at double the market rate. A community improvement fund that had no clear paper trail. And here they were, spending their energy chasing me over a garage business. It was pathetic. And it gave me the leverage I needed. I started quietly talking to neighbors. It's the same ones who once rolled their eyes when the HOA mentioned me. Over coffee, over backyard fences, over quick chats during evening walks, I dropped little pieces of what I'd found. Not accusations, just facts. Hey, did you know the HOA spent $15,000 on lighting upgrades last year? Where exactly? Are those upgrades? Or, funny thing, turns out the HOA president's brother-in-law has the landscaping contract. Explains why we're paying twice the going rate, right? At first, people were skeptical. Nobody wants to believe the folks in charge of their community are either incompetent or corrupt. But as I kept sharing, more neighbors began to see what I saw. They were paying high dues, getting little in return, and being harassed over nonsense, while the board quietly mismanaged the money. That's when the shift happened. Suddenly, my garage business wasn't the story anymore. The story was the HOA. I started going to meetings, not as the accused, but as an observer with receipts. Ask questions, calmly and directly. Can the board show us the invoices for last year's painting project? Silence. Why did we pay $8,000 for a job that other contractors quoted at $3,500? Silence again. Neighbors noticed. Heads started to nod. Whispers filled the room. The board didn't have answers because the truth was too ugly to say out loud. And here's where the real plan formed in my head. See, most people don't realize that HOA boards aren't all powerful. They're just volunteers, elected by the very homeowners they boss around. That means they can be voted out, replaced, overthrown, legally. So I started building a coalition, quietly at first, just a handful of neighbors tired of the nonsense. We met in garages, backyards, living rooms. We drafted a plan to nominate our own candidates. We prepared flyers, emails, social media posts. We weren't going to scream or protest, we were going to out-organize them. And when the next HOA election came around, the board didn't stand a chance. The meeting was packed, standing room only, with neighbors who hadn't shown up in years. People were tired of the fines, the harassment, the wasted money. When the ballots were counted, every single one of our candidates won. The old guard, the very people who tried to shut down my business, were swept out in one night. And just like that, my business didn't just survive the HOA, owned the HOA. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same garage they tried to shut down was now the headquarters of the new board president. Me. We cut the bloated contracts. We lowered dues. We made the books transparent so every homeowner could see exactly where the money was going. And most importantly, we rewrote the rules clear, fair, and reasonable. No more petty harassment. No more bullying. The best part? My business thrived. With the HOA off my back and the community actually supportive, I expanded. Employees. I grew into something bigger than I ever dreamed when I first started tinkering in that garage. And the twist. One day, as I was leaving a board meeting, the former HOA president came up to me. She looked tired, defeated, and for the first time, almost human. She sighed and said, "You know, I buy from your business now. it's good work. That moment was sweeter than any victory speech. Because here's the truth. They thought they could scare me into submission. They thought they could bully me into shutting down my dream. But instead, their harassment pushed me to dig deeper, fight harder, and ultimately take everything they thought they owned. The HOA tried to ban my business from my garage. Now my business owns their HOA. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this. Never let small-minded people crush your vision. Sometimes the biggest obstacles are really just opportunities in disguise. So the next time someone tells you what you can't do, smile. Because you might just end up building something they can't control. So that's the story of how my little garage business not only survived the HOA's attacks, but ended up running the very board that tried to destroy it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that persistence, strategy, and community support can turn any battle into a victory. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more wild HOA tales, and share this video with anyone who's ever felt bullied by a system that thought it was untouchable. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's building something so strong that they have no choice but to respect it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.